This is the EnT podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located on Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am on Treaty Number 8 territory, the traditional meeting grounds and gathering places of our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Hey everybody, welcome to the latest in the Ed Non-Tech show. It's Dr. Doug Reed on the one hand, myself, Dr. Matt Stranick on the other, hoping that the seasonal changes are not affecting you unduly or adversely. What I'm noticing, I'll just point it out that living in a northern part of a province for the first time, I suppose, ever, what I'm noticing isn't so much seasonal temperature dips as I am the fact that the sun actually doesn't even make itself visible in any meaningful way until 9 o'clock, 9:15, going on 9:30 in the morning. And like, for my money, we're not even really halfway into the fall yet. So that's sort of the, people here are just like, yeah, just wait till it's, a little bit later and daylight savings time happens. There's only 5 hours of daylight at a certain point in Fort Mac. Okay, good stuff. So I guess I would just say to anybody out there, seasonal shift and changes can be somewhat, a little bit jarring potentially on the old circadian rhythms and the like. So you should be doing yourself a solid, I think, and just being mindful and aware of your own kind of mental well-being, if I can put it that way. That's kind of what I'm thinking at the top of this show, Doug. I don't know. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing pretty good. Has anybody mentioned to you a full spectrum light yet?
Oh yeah, no, my mom swears by those. As a matter of
okay.
fact, I'm certainly, I certainly realize what all it's like here, and it's just an interesting thing. Various, quite different from spot to spot to spot, if you know what I mean. And again, to say that really, the temperature differences, I don't know. I'm just like, you expect it to be cold in Canada just about anywhere, so it's like whatever. Anyway, man, so what's been going on? What do you you were just sort of describing a pretty busy, I dare say, robust day of various activities, some of which even entailed lifelong learning. Doug is, of course, a very strong proponent of online or of lifelong learning. And you're always trying something new here, pal, I think is what we were getting at a bit before we started to record.
Yeah. I'm still cleaning up from Hurricane Fiona 2 years ago. And my neighbors are older, like they're both in their 80s. And they have a bunch of trees that snapped off like 20 and 30 feet high. And they snapped off, but they didn't fall. So like the top of the tree is leaning against other stuff.
Fractured at a 45 degree angle or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a pole saw. It's a chainsaw on a stick, basically.
Oh, yeah. Those are dope. Yeah.
So my lifelong learning today was, how do I take some of those down and not get killed or not go to the hospital? And it worked. I slow and steady, used my brain. Whenever I felt tired, I stopped. Whenever I thought, is this a good idea? The answer is always no. It's not a good idea. So I cleaned up a bunch of their yard today. And if I just chip away a little bit every weekend, then they'll be so happy. It'll make their lives better. So that's just what I'm doing.
Highly dope. Highly legit. And so then I do wonder if there's sort of any immediate or general correlation you may even make to what you're thinking on this sort of activity is relative to today's topic. I was quite interested to notice in the notes that you're kind of referring to one of the conversations, the conversation I had with Jim Ruland, LA Times best-selling author and just a writer of some really awesome books. I actually spoke with him in July, but just due to shifting around from town to town and hotel suite to hotel suite, it didn't end up coming up until towards the end of August. But really interested that you found that of interest, I suppose, in the present moment. So I just sort of wonder if you might consider setting it up for us, what you're thinking on that topic was there, pal.
Sure. With all my free time, one thing I do is I go back and listen to our episodes.
Okay.
Because I want to get better and I want to learn, and I didn't get to take part in that episode. So I was listening as a listener, right? As an outsider listening in.
Okay.
And he made a comment, Jim Ruland made a comment that just stuck with me. I had a completely different plan for what this episode was going to be. And then I listened to that comment and I'm like, well, heck, okay, we have a new episode. We have a new topic. And
awesome.
It's the importance of that one person. And it's all about mentors and mentees and that whole structure. And it was really neat because it's kind of a long quote for him, but I had to go back and forth 3 or 4 times to get get the quote right.
Nice.
And he's talking about when he became a writer and when he was first dipping his toe in and stuff. And it was my professor was like, oh, well, this is different because he was writing about his experience in the Navy and all his classmates were writing about whatever 18-year-olds write about. So he had some life experience. And his professor went on to say, I think it was just a lot of writing was a little bit different, more interesting to read. He gave me a lot of attention, a lot of feedback, which I was absolutely craving without realizing it. But I was just dying for someone to notice me in a positive way. And so after that, I really latched onto this idea of maybe writing is something I could be good at. And I see that as the beginning of mentorship, especially for guys, right? How often can males in this society say, I need help, or please pay attention to me, right? Maybe I'm being biased because I am a guy, but that is not something that comes easily to people in my experience in my circle.
Awesome.
So that was such an important thing for me to listen to. And I'm like, we need to talk about that more. So what I really like is normally I do the references in chronological order and we start wherever and then end up close to now. And instead you posted that, August 24th? So I'm referencing August 24th, 2024 right off the bat. Just set the table for what we want to talk about. And it's not just a mentee in education, but education is a core component of being a mentor and being a mentee for that matter. So that's where I wanted to go.
Awesome.
So in that interview, when you were talking to him,
yep,
can you give me a little bit more of a feel? Because I know you talked to him before the recording starts and you probably talked to him for a few minutes after the recording starts. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that interview? That was just so interesting to me.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for that. And again, truthfully, it's really awesome for me, just somebody with a literary interest, even apart from being an educator. I mean, like when I first approached Jim through, I guess it would have been both through his Instagram and through his professional website. And he just sort of, he responded. That's all I can say. And again, I just looking back on sort of what the past 7 or 8 months have even held for me. I mean, it was just where the job with my previous role in New Brunswick had ended sort of unexpectedly after a year. And again, it was very much, okay, I'm just going to keep rolling with this as if it was normal and sort of try and fill my time, just kind of enhancing the show basically by getting some really cool interviews to my mind. And so again, you remember, right? There was that whole period just kind of in the late spring, early summer, where I was literally just reaching out to anybody I thought was interesting, including through LinkedIn. And just within a couple of months in between sort of becoming unemployed and then finding out that I had this job here in Alberta, really, I mean, it was, we got something from almost no interviews per se to the latest one that I just did with Chris Bose. That was number 17, right? Within a few months, really, fewer than 6 months for that whole sort of additional area to open up. And so I've had the, I guess, privilege, the ability to take some of these and kind of use them as learning objects, learning opportunities, vis-a-vis like sort of a blended lecture format in my English classes. Because in my English class, we're definitely speaking to authors, we're definitely speaking to authorship as sort of key ways at going into literary criticism. So with Jim, with that conversation, I really came at it as a fanboy kind of first, because when I sort of had originally reached out to him, it was even before having an awareness that I was going to have this English teacher job. It was really just out of, I really appreciate this guy's books. I really appreciate what he's doing in terms of outreach and stuff online. And it was really just for me, like, okay, here's somebody who's written at least 3 or 4 books that I have read a lot and just really enjoyed, and just kind of getting to see his whole process. So there wasn't really that much conversation in the pre sort of chat. As a matter of fact, we did have a lot of bouncing back emails, just kind of making sure the scheduling was just so, and what that was going to look like. But at the end of the day, there wasn't actually that much pre-interview in verbal exchange, or even particularly very much after. And it wasn't for lack of wanting to either. It was simply, he's a super busy guy. I wanted to be respectful of his time. And in as much as being able to show these interviews now in class, I sort of get to critique my own performance as a public speaker, right? So, I mean, you mentioned, right, in our Facebook exchange where you'd watched part of that interview with Chris Bose. Awesome interview. He gave some really amazing insights and responses. But I mean, for my part, I was like, literally, like, I agreed with you, right? I said, I was just, it was 9:30 at night. It was like midnight when it was over almost. I was tired. I was checked out. And like, I really knew that I wanted to have a cool conversation, and I knew that we were having a cool conversation. But the part of my mind that just knew that it was going to be not even that much sleep before I had to get up and do stuff, it was just kind of pushing the verbal tics out of it. And so I point that stuff out during when I played the interviews, not in their entirety, but a certain amount of them in class. Just like, so here's an example of what I would probably have done differently. And so this is something that you, if you're looking at doing this kind of thing, may want to consider within your own practice. Because for a final research project, I'm pretty much giving them open format in terms of a media thing if people want to do that, as opposed to a paper. And so I have had people actually indicating to me that they're planning to do video-based interviews of some variety. And so again, sort of taking what was sort of like a kind of lumpy kind of video exchange and then turning it into more of a just educational kind of thing, right? In terms of a teaching moment. I just think that that kind of speaks well of the whole approach that we have here, bro. The warts and all, kind of lumpy, not too overheated, kind of gravy, homemade gravy kind of approach we got going on with the show, to use a really starchy metaphor, I suppose. Sorry, bro, you asked. That was a long-winded response to that question, honestly.
No, but it was nice because you brought it back to mentoring and teaching and education, right? It's like, hey, here's what I just did. Here's evidence. Maybe you want to avoid that, right? Because we all have our things.
While at the same time also drawing significant attention to the value of the exchange in the first place.
Yeah.
I guess what it is like, don't let lack of experience or lack of proficiency keep you from doing something cool, because the value you're going to get out of this creative endeavor, however imperfect, and in a lot of cases because of those imperfections, it's going to give you something unique. It's going to open up ways of engaging with the art and with artists and the wider culture that you may not even necessarily be aware of or cognizant of at the time. So again, it was a chance to kind of, with this interview that you mentioned, it was kind of a chance to elevate again, re-elevate, because I used some of the gym interview in my class, right? I brought up the gym interview in class and just went through it, brought them to the website. I even sort of pointed the students, you can actually read some of these short stories in literary magazines. So I kind of knew when I had the conversation in the first place that there might be some persistent educational value out of this, in as much as it's a persistent resource, the blog posting and stuff, right? So,
and that comes back to how I prepare each episode, because back when we started, of course, who knows what we were doing. We're a little better now, but I take every one of these episodes as if I was like a guest lecturer in a class, and somebody said, talk about this topic. So that's where I head with these things. So just to see you and the way you approach it is really neat to me. I really enjoy that different perspective.
And then you are going way back in the Wayback Machine with this next reference here. Like we're talking, well, why don't you tell us what we're talking about with that one, pal?
Okay, because I love history and I can't help myself. We're looking at Ayer's 1894, so 130 years ago. And it was a book called The Mentor. And it was a little book about the guidance of such men and boys as would appear to advantage in the society of persons of the better sort. It's like, oh, like that title. I thought the title was just crazy. But one thing I really liked is a quote that I found in it, and it was, to select well amongst old things is almost equal to inventing new ones. And if you can find somebody to help you with the old things, that makes it so much easier to move forward. So you don't have to fall in every ditch and learn these lessons that have already been learned. You get to stand on the shoulders of those who came before you. And I just love the way they phrased it.
Nice.
Yeah, I really liked that whole concept. Just, it's like, yeah, mentors are good. They can help you. Let them help you. And I know we've touched upon like supervisors and postgraduate in a previous episode.
Yeah.
And we both got lucky. We both had great supervisors, like
It's
amazing
true.
Supervisors.
Yeah.
And I know the people we were talking about the people that said, yeah, I'm trying to survive the velociraptor. Or it's like, that person is not a mentor, right? That person is eating you alive and getting what it can from your bones, and maybe you'll graduate out the end. So the positivity of having mentors and people that are there to help is
absolutely
just lovely to me. So I just had to jump back 130 years because, come on, I found it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And again, just sort of thinking on some of the content of some of these conversations that I've been sharing with the students from these interviews that we've had. Like what I've found is, because I'm bringing in a pretty wide swath of writers. I mean, I had somebody like A.J. Hartley, that's the novelist of many genres, Shakespeare scholar, who is writing books with Blink 182 guitar player Tom DeLonge. Had him on the show again before I knew about this job. And so he's somebody who's been on the New York Times bestseller list. So he operates at a pretty privileged, elevated level relative to the culture, relative to just being a literary person in general. But then in his interview, he's talking about how he came from a working class background. He's talking about how his parents were both teachers of some variety. And so that's exactly why he's sort of going well below what the scope of his platform would dictate by speaking to me or to our show, right? Because we're not the kind of thing that's actively trying to jack itself up onto getting a high follower count or anything. I mean, the more people that look at this stuff, the better. But I mean, we're not going after a high number of people watching this or engaging with it as such, right? Because it's just, that's not what this thing is about. So for the fact that somebody who has had success in a pretty high number of volumes in terms of traditional media, it's kind of telling to his overall viewpoint on the creative endeavor. And so when I'm talking with these students, when I'm sort of sharing some of these interviews, you can have people like somebody like Chris Bose, indigenous, independent artist based in Kamloops, working in a completely different sphere of culture and at a completely different level. But you have this other person, New York Times bestselling author and whatnot, but they both actually, in their telling of how they view creativity, in their telling of how they sort of engage with their art and their practice, there's just so many areas of similarity. And so it's sort of finding those areas of overlap and commonality between different practitioners in different areas of a similar endeavor. This really been interesting to me lately. And again, something that struck with me in both instances was, both these people I've been kind of bringing into the class is their emphasis on the people who helped them get established and sort of figure some things out in terms of their particular mentors, right? As you say, educators who kind of gave them something to work with that helped them find what they needed to on the way to where they are now. So
I like how that pierces the myth of the self-made person. The I didn't need anybody. It's like everybody needs everybody, right?
it's true.
I read some research where they said the reason why back in the day we developed faster than chimpanzees developed is because we were social learners. And chimpanzees were more independent and they didn't want to learn from each other. I don't know whether that's true, but I read it and it's like, yeah.
I think there's a pretty historical sequence in the film 2001 Space Odyssey where the monolith kind of lands, and it just happens that our sort of primate ancestors were the one gathering around it and getting the alien frequencies off the thing jacked into their chordal whatever. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how I sort of just figured that we differentiated ourselves. Just alien intervention, just boop.
Yeah, I struggled with 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like it's pretty, and it is one of the most boring shows. I love science fiction, but that show is boring. And I've watched it like 2 or 3 times. I thought, okay, maybe I was in a bad mood, maybe I was tired, and it's like, nope, it doesn't do it for me. Just
the immensity of space doesn't always translate well onto the small screen. What can you say, right?
No, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
But to go from 2001: A Space Odyssey to our next article, they were both the same year, the same timeline. So I found an article from 1968 by Wexler, Harding, and Donald, and it's about the mentor system. Staff comments on the mentor system because the University of Ontario medical school brought in mentoring.
Oh.
Back, 57 years ago now. And they had a very interesting little paper on how it went. Like, that State of the Union, how is it going? Give us the annual update, that sort of thing.
Yep.
And they had a bunch of different people comment, and I just grabbed 2 of them, and it just made me laugh because it's like, to my mind, the mentor system is a wonderful social idea, giving both students and staff a chance to meet in a relaxed, non-academic atmosphere. Any other benefits which accrue from this meeting will depend only on the personalities of the people involved.
Okay.
And I completely agree, right? Like, if you have a mentor but you just don't click, there's not as much value there.
It's true.
You can learn what you can learn, but if you don't click, there's always just that something off a little.
Yeah.
And the second one is from one of the students in the medical school who would now have been a doctor for 55 odd years. Their one comment was, Happy New Year, and don't get too stoned at your mentors.
Always sage advice, to be sure.
It just made me laugh that this was an academic publication. And that was 50 odd years ago. And it wasn't legal then, not the way it is now. But it was, I just liked it because it's different perspectives of the same concepts.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to jump up then and look at Yang 2006 or Metros and Yang 2006, and it's about the importance of mentors.
Mm-hmm.
And mentoring, as we know it today, is loosely modeled on the historical craftsman-apprenticeship relationship, where young people learn a trade by shadowing the master artisan. In the mid-70s, corporate America redefined mentoring as a career development strategy. Right? Like, I like that master apprentice model where I learn from my supervisors and they guide me and they help me, or I learn from my coach and they guide me and they help me. When it comes to corporate America and suddenly, no, this is a career development strategy, it's like, that doesn't work for me.
Bit of a slog.
Yeah, it's like, oh, here's another networking opportunity. And it's like, no, I want to learn the craft. I want to learn the skills. I want to figure out where to head, but I don't want to climb the ladder. I'm just not that person that wants to climb the ladder. And I think we have had similar conversations about climbing ladders, especially in post-secondary.
Well, it just, for me, I don't know that I've had experiences like having a mentor per se. I've had, like, as you say, supervisor figures, with all respect to the folks who I worked with at the University of Calgary, but there was never any element of it that sort of had a dimension of a personal friendship. And I'm not saying that in any kind of negative or pejorative way. It wasn't an element of what that involved or how it played out. And I know that is kind of considered part of it. I've had like awesome colleagues. I've had leaders within my thing that I've respected and engaged with. And then others, so not so. But that's a different story that's already kind of on the books for a while. And so for me, just talking about this, it's sort of a bit like I wasn't a kid playing sports. I decided pretty early that I was going to have a individualistic or non-conformist kind of path through my thing, particularly when it came to dealing with school, particularly when it came to dealing with any kind of extracurricular engagement, right? And so this is where I can say there were people of influence, even in my cultural thing, that I looked up to, but it was never, there was never any sort of person ahead of me who I really, there were senior colleagues, particularly at College of North Atlantic Qatar, where I could say this person really helped me out. I learned a lot from them. But again, mentorship, I think that's sort of maybe a more prescribed or sort of a more formal kind of relationship with above and beyond even that kind of effective area, right? And like you're describing, like a more journeyman apprentice kind of thing. I've worked across a pretty fragmented education work environment, just hopping provinces, hopping countries, hopping institutions. And it's just because of the nature of contemporary academic work and contemporary academic assignments. I mean, you end up in a place where it's, okay, this town has one institution I could potentially work at. And then if the contract ends or there's no other work to be had beyond that, you're basically looking at pulling up stakes again. And so that kind of tends to work against those sort of longer term, meaningful, significant mentorship kind of relationships that you described. Again, that's just kind of my experience from it, bro. I feel like you may have had a different path with some of this stuff.
I actually didn't. I was going to take it further.
Okay.
Because I've spent a bunch of time in K to 12.
Yeah.
In addition to post-secondary. And I would say it's not just post-secondary where that's how the system is set up in our society. It is certainly that way in K to 12.
Okay.
Where there's some people that's like, oh yeah, can you job shadow this person or be that person's buddy or guide them a bit? But everything is so siloed and fractured. And my job is those 25 to 37 kids in that room and I got to take care of my own in my own room. So they've set it up. I think the system is now in place that kind of stops any real mentorship.
It's a nice to have. It's not a need to have. It's something that they pay lip service to, but it's like with any other kind of high-minded item in an educational setting. It's sort of like, if we can do it with existing resources, great. But if it requires any further development or any kind of variation on the norm that requires additional resources, it's less likely to come to fruition. Let's be real. And so, just as guardians of the public purse, as both K-12 and higher ed places tend to be, you're kind of beholden to the line budget, right? And every government comes in with its own ideas about what it's going to do in those sectors. Education becomes de facto a hot button or political issue, in as much as we're going to put resources in this kind of programming and not into that. So for anybody who's sort of interested in just kind of maintaining this kind of enhancement or kind of level of programming, they're kind of fighting against trends by people who are not going to have a long-term investment in the thing. And so again, you can't count on allocating new resources, because maybe in 2 or 3 years, the way with that just ends up drying up and you don't have really anything to sustain that kind of initiative. Again, that's just kind of from my observation of how these things can go, right?
Oh yeah. And I've had specific mentorship in certain areas. Like when I was learning how to sail, you want a mentor, find a good captain, right, on the boat. That person wants the boat to do as well as possible, or go around that mark a certain way, or sail to windward a certain way, and they'll help you get there if you have a good captain. And I was lucky, I had 3. So
Awesome.
I had these people once a week, let's go do this thing, right? And I'd learn a little bit and they'd guide me and help me. And there was some coaching, and they were lifelong friends. Like if they were to give me a shout and say, hey, do you want to go for a drink? Absolutely, I'm there. Right?
Awesome.
No matter what, I'm there. And I've had the opportunity to sail so many places. Like I got to sail in Grenada, I got to sail in the British Virgin Islands, just because I was a good mentee. And they're like, hey, we've got this boat, do you want to come do? And it's like, yes. Like, they didn't have to finish the sentence. The answer was yes, because you're a good person. We get along really well. We're lifelong friends. Of course, I'll come and help you, right? Like,
right.
Yeah, it's pretty tough to jump in the water behind the boat and go swimming in salt water and 30 degrees. That's centigrade. I have no idea what that is in Fahrenheit, but
okay.
Just that sort of thing. So I didn't find it in my profession, but I found it in other aspects of my life.
Awesome.
If that makes sense.
Makes lots of sense, man. Sounds lit.
Yeah, it's pretty nice to know that I can go rent a boat or hire a boat, depending on what country you're in. That anything less than 60 feet long, I can rent from anywhere, not need to hire a captain to come with us, or not pay for that person and give them food and all the rest. We can just go do our thing.
Excellent.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a little aside. It's my
That's
turn.
a major aside, and that's totally in keeping with the main topic of the show. And I think because, again, we spend so much time on the show kind of giving deference to informal learning, lifelong learning, holistic approaches to teaching and learning, which value the whole individual as opposed to just sort of these fragmented, siloed kind of approaches. And so everything that you're talking about, again, the skills that you would get from sailing and captainship, whether cognitive or in terms of just sense of self-efficacy and the endorphin rush of getting to do something complex that a lot of people don't get to necessarily do at a high level or with any great proficiency, right? You're kind of stepping into something that a lot of people maybe aspire to, but don't necessarily take the steps to implement. And so having these mentor-like figures, having these significant captains who, with their friendship and their willingness to kind of bring cool people into the fold, as it were, within sort of the culture of boating. I mean, again, I think with, I've been watching some pro sports a bit, and I do sort of tend to see well, I guess where my sons, both my kids play sports and have had pretty significant relationships with teammates and coaches, where I think that they probably have some version of that. But when I'm watching NBA or when I'm watching NHL, or even just today, my girlfriend and I were watching some NFL, and just sort of seeing how the older, more seasoned vets kind of interact with the younger crowd in terms of strategy and sort of post play kind of discussions and stuff. It's just that's again just kind of a window into something that kind of cuts across so many different areas of endeavor. And so your sailing stuff is going to benefit, your teaching stuff is going to benefit your personal life. It's going to give you sort of an enhanced sense of wellness. And for me, this whole sort of holistic approach to education, this whole sort of, I've been starting every class lately with a 10-minute spiel just while people are kind of trickling in after the bell or whatever, after the start time, where I'm just really, I spend about 10 minutes kind of, I'm sure it's getting repetitive, but just kind of doing a thing about wellness, right? Like hours of sunlight, staying hydrated, eating a vegetable each day, whatever you can do. Separating yourself from a screen for a lot of time, even if it means maybe not quite getting a deadline as much as you'd like, because at the end of the day, like, your work is going to be a reflection of the energy that you bring to it. And if you're going into it just stressed and fucking exhausted and tired and hungry, just because you may be spending more hours on task, but if those hours are just sleep deprived and hungry and garbage hours, basically, then the work is not going to be as good as it can be, strictly by definition. And so that's kind of what I've been telling myself. I was like, I was going to do marking for 7 hours yesterday, and I just so ended up not. Going to take a run at it tonight. Got to wait until the afternoon for my class tomorrow, so I got time tomorrow. But it was sort of like, I think I just need 24 hours completely away from this in order so that when I sit down for it the next day, I won't just be bitter and kind of cranky about it. I'll be able to kind of come at it with a good level of energy, bro. Just kind of, anyway, that was my turn to dissemble a bit.
That reminds me, I don't know if I've said it on another episode, but I'm going to say it now. Okay. The end of my first semester of my master's, I was burnt out, like unreal. Like, I could not hold a conversation. I couldn't keep a thought in my head. I had taken an extra class because I was so nervous. I wanted to make sure that if I failed one, I still had enough to graduate. Like, I was just a mess that way. And by Christmas time, I needed a break. And somebody was in one of my classes, and it was like January 6th or January 7th. We ended up in an elevator in that education tower at U of C. And he's like, you need to take more time off. And I'm like, no, I'm serious. I'm doing my master's. He said, you need to take Saturday and Sunday off, and you will get so much more done. And I'm like, I don't believe you. He goes, give it a try. And it was life affirming. I would work until Friday night, right? Whatever, 9, 10 o'clock Friday night, I would work, and then I wouldn't look at anything until Monday morning.
Nice.
And it was 2 days to like let my brain clean itself out.
Yes.
And then I went back with energy. I was so happy and excited to be back into it. And I got so much more done. And that's something I have told every grad student I've worked with. What you're missing is more time off. You need to not do anything for this long. And my brother lives in Ireland, and he had one of his friends was dating like a very high level athlete in Ireland. She was a runner, and she put a training plan together for them, and they were both athletic guys. And she said, you're missing one component. You're not getting enough rest, because they were doing this workout this day, this workout the next day. And it's like, you need to take way more time off and give your body a chance to recover. And he was shocked, and it worked. So it's one of those mentorship things. You need people with those skills to help you get there. And it doesn't need to be just formal.
Yeah.
Yes, the practical experience.
Absolutely, bro. I'm liking it. I'm there for it. I'm hearing it. I haven't had much direct experience with it to the extent even that you have described, for sure. But again, I recognize that importance, and I suppose within my own way as an educator of some variety at a certain point of experience in my career, and like I kind of hope that I can be that way for somebody. That's kind of the aspiration. I think of anybody who takes the educator role seriously. So awesome, man. So then we're moving.
We're moving into 2017.
Yes. Oh, are we? Double dang. Look at that. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't miss any. Yang was 2006. Yeah, Metros and Yang. Hernandez, Estrada, Woodcock, and Schultz, 2017. Mentor qualities that matter. The importance of perceived, not demographic similarity.
And that's one hell of a visual, though, too. Love a good visual on the show, and that is one hell of a good.
So what they did is, and yeah, the visual, when I saw the visual, I knew we were going to talk about this article. I knew it. So they have a structure in place, and there's 3 phases, right? There's inputs, processes, and outputs. That seems pretty simple. Right? And inputs are things like demographic similarity and perceived similarity, because sometimes you connect with people. It's like, oh, you guys should get along together because you're both Canadians. And it's like, oh, I know a bunch of Canadians I don't want anything to do with. Right? I know a bunch of Canadians I really enjoy spending time with, but there are some where it's like, nope, I'm done with you. My time is too valuable.
You can spot them from a mile out, quite frankly. Yeah.
That's it. So that's the inputs. And then with the output, it's career commitment. And it's like, okay, cool, nice and clear. And then the processes are in the middle. The processes are the supports, the psychosocial, the instrumental, the co-authoring experience, relationship satisfaction. All that's in the mix for the processes. And their one intervention is between inputs and processes, and that's the contact person. That's, let's put you in touch with your mentor.
Nice.
And it was such a sweet graphic that I really liked it. It's nice and simple. It's to the point. Their titles work. I can just read the title. It's like, okay, I know where they're headed with that.
Exactly.
But when you look at the article, right, each one of those is a couple of pages long for the explanation because they have to. But now they talk about social influence and mentoring theories. They talk about how you need socializing agents and how mentors have to be that person. It reminds me of whenever I'm supervising a grad student, they don't know who they want on their committee. Right? They might have an idea, maybe this person or maybe that person, but it's really my network and my socializing. They'll say, oh, you might want so-and-so. So-and-so could be good. And it's having that wider or depth of socialization, I guess. And they're talking about, they did a bunch of work here on underrepresented proteges into STEM.
Okay.
Because we're still talking about STEM. It's been a month, but we're still going to talk about STEM because that's where the jobs are. That's where the money is. That's where the government's heading.
I think it's a worthy place to keep coming back to within the context of a whole bunch of things that we kind of keep cycling to and from within the show. I think that you're absolutely correct in as much as for a primarily natural resource and increasingly service-based economy, STEM education is seen as sort of being a direct corollary to or direct linkage between public sites of education and other kind of cultural, entrance points, if you will, into an economy such as ours. And so, yeah, I mean, it's totally timely, it's totally on point, bro. You don't have to necessarily apologize on behalf of the impetus, bro.
No, what I do need to do is clarify. I was talking to somebody who has listened to our STEM episode.
Okay.
And I made some kind of comment about when I was teaching engineers, they all looked the same, right? They all had the same shirt, they all had the same haircut, they all had most of them had the pocket protector and all that. And I said it seemed like it was kind of a uniform. They were very, very homogeneous, right? It was that group. And he is an engineer. And he was like, not all engineers are like that. And I said, no, it was the ones that I was teaching.
Yeah.
That seemed to be, I said, yeah, once they go out into the field, without a doubt.
Well, and they get the
take care of it.
But engineering as a field, I mean, it's one of those things where they have like the signet ring or whatever. You
Yep.
get the engineering like ring that you can only wear if you. It's kind of got these arcane sort of accoutrements and rituals, right? Like I'm thinking like the stonemasons episode of The Simpsons or some shit. Like, oh yeah, the engineers, they kind of scurry off to their sites of practice where who knows what goes on, right? So, but much respect to the engineers.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, keeping shit from not falling apart on a public level more than it does. We appreciate
Isn't that
it.
what the ring is about? That signet ring?
Is it?
I thought the original history. I don't know if this is true. This is what
I have
engineers are
no
told.
even concept. I'm pulling it out. It might be a cocktail ring for all I know.
It's a
I know
ring.
they got a ring. I know they give it out. I know it's like a big deal, isn't it? Any engineers can tell us otherwise, but
yeah, please tell us otherwise, because I was told it was a ring made of metal from a bridge that collapsed, and that was supposed to help remind everybody wearing the ring to do your best work, make sure everything's the way it should be, don't scrimp. Remember that engineer that designed that bridge that fell? Like, there's supposed to be that component to it too, and I don't know if that came later. I do not know, but it's a great story. But another part of the concept with the engineers is like, he was saying that they're pretty multidisciplinary, and it's like, I agree, but I can also look at science and I can name half a dozen or a dozen different sciences.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just STEM seems to be the bottle that everything gets dumped into. That's the sexy label on the bottle right now. So
it's a cultural driver, if you will, of sorts. Yeah, I gotcha.
It really, really is. So basically, that's what I've got for mentorship. And for me, it wasn't just mentorship, and it wasn't the importance of mentorships. It was the importance that one person makes. I wanted to come from the one person. Because years ago, when I was at NATE, we had a really cool team of people. And one time we were sitting around and we were talking about that one person. Everybody had, and it was bosses. Everybody's like, oh, I had that boss. You were that boss did this, that boss did that. And when it revolved around to me, right, it's like, I don't have that person. Right? I don't have that person that did this, wasn't the great boss. Like, some of my bosses were fine, some were not. And then the next person in line said, I was going to say you. Like, literally, she said, you're the best boss I've ever had. You listen and you care. And I'm like, cool. Well, I didn't learn that from role modeling at work. Like,
you picked up things that seemed like they should work, you floated them, you iterated them, and you established practice in a sort of not self-made, because nobody's self-made, as we've already discussed on the show, but you sort of took more of a, constructionist approach, I suppose, towards the endeavor, as opposed to kind of having a pre-made leadership kit coming at you. And I think there may be some, I mean, again, I don't care to necessarily speculate as to specific areas or institutions, but I have to think that, at places like U of T or some of these larger institutions, that if you're on a certain trajectory within your career, if you've sort of made connections going through where there may be sort of more established protocols at some of these, I guess, more higher profile places, potentially, in as much as these kinds of things. Like there are places that people go explicitly to become leaders, right? There are places that people go explicitly to really own and take on the leadership aspect. And so the whole field even of educational leadership, we had a conversation with my awesome colleague Carol Loy pretty early on in the conversation series. Dr. Lee Smith, who was also part of a cohort of educational leaders. There are people who are there taking it very seriously, and there are people who are implementing mentorship at their own levels. But again, I have to think where, like you didn't necessarily have somebody, I didn't necessarily have somebody. Sometimes it's just a matter of the place just doesn't necessarily have a great capacity for it. Every place kind of specializes or has certain areas of excellence, local strength and whatnot. And maybe it's just a case where having people who have the personal and career kind of confidence and chops to help elevate their peers. I mean, it is kind of maybe not that common a set of skills or social knowledge, right?
Yeah. Now I've worked with great people. Like we both worked with amazing people, and they've helped us out in the short term. But the length.
Yeah, right.
Really
I mean, I can point to great instances of leadership for sure.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I've observed great instances of leadership. But if you're talking about something like mentorship, you are talking about something that has more of an elevated purpose. It goes above and beyond being able to run your office competently or with integrity. It becomes a matter of actually reaching out to people, looking with a 5-year view forward to sort of help build potential and self-efficacy within employees as individuals, but then also being able to kind of scaffold that into a legitimately personal enterprise where it comes across as being an extension of you as an authentic human being and not something that's sort of bifurcated from your just sort of general kind of work mentality. And those holistic skills, right, are in a lot of cases lacking, where if you're just going to your job, just occupying the role as manager or director or whatever, and you are just sort of seeing that as your job, as a certain set of tasks and skills that you sort of address in the execution of that, if you're not really into the whole bringing your full personhood into it, then we've all worked for those people. I mean, sometimes they're good at it, but they're never inspiring. You never think, okay, I really am interested to go beyond what I would normally do here. And in a lot of cases, it has, quite the opposite effect, as we've spoken of and unpacked at length in various aspects of this show, particularly with regards to an institution whose name will not be mentioned for now. But you know what I mean, bro? Kind of circles back to even what the first impetus of the show happened to be. Now that I've think on it, in the effect that we both kind of had absence of that in our thing that brought us together, ostensibly career-wise, to even birth this show into the cyber interweb space thingy here that we're on. Yo? Something like that, bro?
I like the interwebs. The interwebs are
We
good.
love the interwebs. Deep in the darks of the interwebs. And you've got a Dilbert on this thing, man. You got some lit visuals. Can you speak to the Dilbert and then possibly some of the others, my friend?
There's, okay, so I have 4 images from my digital clutter.
Yeah.
Because I can't help it. I have 2 Dilberts. Is there a Dilbert that you would care about? I like the point of your boss.
Well, I just kind of scrolled sort of midway through the document, so I was looking at the one with the little egghead dude, but either or, bro.
For people that don't know, if you go take a look at Dilbert, right, the pointy-haired boss is the typical boss that is in the cartoon, and then there's the young intern, and the boss walks in and says, "Hey, I've decided to be your mentor," and the intern's like, "What? Why me? I wish I was dead." And then the boss says, "You cry ugly. I think we need to work on that." And it's like, you're picking the wrong thing to fix. It just made me laugh. It just made me laugh, and when I found it, I really enjoyed
For sure. It. Relatable, let's just say, in addition to being comedy, and in fact, probably comic because it's relatable. Let's think about that, sports fans. Coolness. Okay, awesome. So as ever, be sure to check the visuals. They're all really good. And equally dope, I'm sure, are the word, question, and phrase of the podcast.
Yes, and the link to the episode is analogtrope.ca/podcast.
You know it.
Right on. So the word of the podcast is mentoring, because I think we've said it a couple of times. The question of the podcast is, how did you meet your mentors? And how can others use this approach to find theirs? Because some of us are wandering in the woods and we'd love to find the mentor.
Two of us are. We're both kind of. I'll wager here. I'll point it out that when I sort of see somebody who is my immediate colleague and a really good friend, I go, okay, I'm learning a lot from Doug. I know Doug is learning from me.
Yep.
Because of perhaps somewhat of a smaller, an age gap or career gap or whatever. Doug's been at this a bit longer than I have. I could be inclined to say Doug is a mentor of sorts, but that would sort of fly in the face almost of what this enterprise happens to be. We're sort of co-creators. We're equally involved in creating and sharing this endeavor. We're occupying sort of slightly different areas of our career sort of progression, with Doug having spent more time on the thing. And so even though you may have potentially the scenario here for a mentorship of sorts, I mean, again, this is something where you've heard both Doug and I say pretty clearly, it's an absence for each of us. And so hence a very legit question from Doug as to what's it like for those of you who have had that, right? We're curious. Yeah. We'd like to know. So.
And the phrase of the podcast was very early on. And you made the comment, don't let your lack of experience stop you from doing something cool.
100%.
And that was so amazing to me that had to be it. That was the showstopper for me.
Well, thanks. And in terms of that really is something that I've kind of tried to live according to over the years that I've been involved in just writing and creative endeavors of various kinds. But what I've really found myself in terms of my current role, right, as an English teacher for the first time in quite a while, is in my, project design, my curricular design for this. The students will be presenting on a research project of some variety. And I'm really I'm really seeing actually a lot of students kind of going outside the 12 to 14 page MLA paper, which is an option, and sort of challenging themselves a bit with some media formats. So even people who, for instance, haven't had the experience making a video or an audio recording about a subject or whatever, they're trying it out because I'm giving them that as an option. I have like a creative writing option on one of my assignments where you can analyze a short story or poem, or you can try writing a short story or poem and then talk about your choices. And so I just think there's not enough opportunities in our society to kind of incentivize or reward kind of low-key, messy, low-stakes kind of opportunities to just frig around and try something strictly for the enjoyment of trying something. And I think that is a very crucial thing that I've kind of taken away from the show that we've kind of been discussing and sort of building out here, this notion of hands-on learning, experiential learning. Don't be afraid to take risks, because the risks that you think you're taking are very minuscule in comparison to the sheer enjoyment you can get of trying something new and bringing something of some originality, even if it's like poorly executed, into the world. It's just something that we need more of. And I'm just kind of doing what I can in my little limited way, in my little English teacher job, to kind of put that to people that maybe you can kind of think outside the box a bit in terms of what you're trying to do. And so I think just, again, this episode that you've kind of put together for us here, Doug, in terms of topics and sources, really does have a lot of strong resonance for themes that we've been hitting on the show since the get-go. So I just would end, I suppose, my comments for saying thanks a lot for the awesome topic, Doug. And I guess I would also just say thanks to anybody who's checking this out for any reason whatsoever, even if you don't like it. And perhaps especially if you don't like it. We'd love to hear from you. You got anything else you want to put out here, Doug, or are we kind of wrapping up the record here?
I think we're wrapping it up. I hope I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too, and I'll see you next time.
Already looking forward to next week, bro. Catch you next time. Later, everybody.
Right on. Goodbye.